And where are you living now?
London.
Cool.
North London.
So are you actually connected to the sort of vegan scene in London? Because I see a lot of stuff from meetups and so on going down.
No, up until last week, I've been kind of a pariah.
Oh, really?
Not intentionally. I just haven't gone to any meetups.
Pariah is a pretty strong word. All right, go on, yeah.
But vegan activists contacted me last Saturday, I think, and said he was in the neighbourhood. Could he pop over?
Right.
Is this microphone okay?
Yeah, we got the same microphone, so yeah, it's copacetic.
Yeah, he asked if he could pop over, and all of a sudden I felt like embraced. So I'm waiting for the phone calls to start just flood in now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how it is. One of the questions I got from Charles, a.k.a. the Vegan Cheetah, he was asking me, well, wouldn't my channel change if instead of having 1,000 viewers or 2,000 viewers, if it was 10,000 viewers? Because he was aware that I kind of work within self-imposed limits. And my answer to him at that moment, I hadn't thought about it previously, but I said to him, it's not that 10,000 people could change this channel. One person can change this channel. Like if there was one person I knew living within 300 kilometers of here, whatever the story is, it could make a big difference. And earlier on my channel, when I was spending more time to talk about politics in China and that kind of thing, if there had been one person really interested in that stuff, they could have sat down at this desk next to me and we could have talked about politics in China together. And the same is true about animal rights or any of the other issues that interest me. I'd be totally open to one person fundamentally changing what I'm doing on my channel. But on the other hand, I'm kind of resistant to the abstract idea of 10,000 people who don't really know me influencing what I'm doing on the channel. So anyway, I'm maybe a little bit different from the average YouTuber that way. I'm not chasing that crowd.
No, I've been toying with the idea of proposing live on air some kind of meetup. Kind of, I think it was inspired by your pancakes idea.
Right.
Your vegan pancakes idea. Maybe vegan meetup where we don't discuss, to begin with, what can we do with, writing go vegan in chalk or holding placards and so on. We just meet up and talk.
Yeah.
And try and let something happen. Try and get to know each other a little bit first. I like this idea of, I won't say building a community, but at least knowing each other. And
well, those issues of trust. I mean, it's funny because some people react to my channel as if I'm only saying things that are negative, and some react only as if I'm only saying things that are positive. But I'm really aware of the kind of delicate balancing act you get into with that stuff. Like running a pancake stand with somebody. Do you trust them enough to handle the money? Do you trust them enough that they're going to show up on time? Or that they're going to call you if they can't show up on time? And if they call you, that their excuse is not going to be BS, that it's a real reason. Like, when I was a teenager, I worked at Starbucks. You got all those issues working at Starbucks where there's no politics involved and no ideology or what have you. So I mean, I'm just really sensitive to those issues. And when you get into questions of leadership and followership and process, we have a group of vegans here in Victoria. I assume they're still doing their thing. They might have stopped because I stopped paying attention to them. But when I was meeting up with them, they were totally consumed with dominating their time and their agenda, protesting against the use of horses to pull horse-drawn carriages.
Yeah.
Now, as vegan issues go, this one is so marginal. Like, you're into the area, like, with honey. I don't eat honey, but, like, I'm not going to denounce you to Durian Rider if you eat honey. Like, it's marginal enough that I can recognize, honey is not the same as veal. And it was like, why, of all the possible issues to take a stand on and invest your limited resources, why would you pick the one that not only the general public won't support you on, like meat eaters don't sympathize, but that even other vegans are going to be skeptical of or reluctant, like, with these particular horses. So we're talking about like 5 horses in Victoria as opposed to, thousands of cows and pigs, huge numbers. And like, what's going to happen to them if you actually shut down this small business giving? Like, I mean, all the questions surrounding it. It's like, what is the point? But anyway, but my point here for this conversation, yeah.
Could it be something like that? I was thinking about this very topic today. Could it be, with something like horse-drawn carriages? That's a battle you could potentially win.
Yeah, but maybe winning that is also kind of meaningless because then it's just invisible, right? Like, all right, if horse-drawn carriages stop appearing in the streets here in Victoria, does that galvanize anyone to become vegan? I just say one sense in which I'm still optimistic about human nature is that I think, like normal people, like my own mother, go through their whole lives genuinely not knowing where milk comes from. Like, it's ridiculous, but it's true. And, my mother's been all over the world and has a university diploma and has an impressive sounding career and so on. But, like, seriously, when she was 50 years old, she did not know the difference between, a bull and a steer. And she was shocked just to learn that animals get castrated. Like, basically. So, it's not that especially here in Canada, it's not that I'm optimistic about mobilizing massive support for veganism. But when you look at that, okay, there's a wedge issue. There's something where people respond to it and non-vegans sympathize and something's possible. With horse-drawn carriages, another one that we have here in Canada in the north is, dogs pulling sleds. And like, if dogs, the dogs actually love it. Like, I'm actually opposed. I'm one of the only vegans who actually talks about domestication of animals. This is one of the things I wanted to raise with you. That's dropped out of the discourse in contrast to 1999 or some other year you want to take. Nobody talks about that. But if you know dogs and you actually see the dogs that engage in this sport, or of even sometimes it's just a mode of transport for Native people of pulling the sled, the dogs love it. They're happy that to them this is the meaning of life. And I
can imagine my dog would be happy pulling a sled.
Yeah. And I recognize, like, there's a theoretical sense in which you can say this is animal exploitation, but actually for these dogs, it's like a midway point between being feral and being domesticated because they do live in a pack. And, they compete amongst each other in the pack for who gets to be in the front of the sled, and they get a little bit of exercise, and there's a kind of push and pull there. But like for me, it's like, okay, you want me to look at a dog that's full-time job is decorating your carpet or making your kids happy. Your dog that watches TV with you. And vegans say this is ethically okay. But, like to come down hard on, basically rural people who have a dog and a dog sled, which obviously, again, the number of animals is trivial compared even to vivisection, total number of animals being killed for vivisection, let alone meat industry. So anyway, look. This is a digression, but my basic point was when you get these groups, whether you're making pancakes or doing some other protest, trust, cooperation, but then also how do we decide on priorities? Because even if I agree with you, or even if I'm willing to concede the point, like I'm willing to say, look, I don't agree, but you can be right. Like I don't care about being right. What's our priority for this weekend? It's really going to be dog sleds, or it's really going to be horse-drawn carriages, as opposed to milk or, vivisection, or you choose. So yeah, that's all. That was a long digression from that basic point.
Sorry, I'm choking on tea.
You see, man, it's that caffeine. You see?
It's a neurotoxin.
Durian Rider is going to be at your door telling you that you're a worthless, lazy piece of shit, and that's all you're ever going to be. Yeah.
I think you were Passion and Fruits.
Yeah, I remember that kid. I talked to him back in the day. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I came down so hard on him and Brianna.
Yep.
I seem to recall their crimes were wanting to go to the fruit festival and get some contacts.
Yep. Yes, they were guilty of self-promotion, something Durian Rider would never do. Look, I'm going to make a concession here. If I had to take the train to Vladivostok, i.e. a long train journey, I would not want to sit next to Passion and Fruit. I wouldn't. I've talked to the guy. I don't want to spend 12 hours on a train with him. I also do not want to sit next to Brianna Jack Fruitson. Really, I don't. I don't know if you can search your soul and decide that. But that's where all these issues come up, you know. As you probably gotten from my channel, I know a lot about the history of communism, including current, like, you know, recent stuff and also stuff from 100 years ago. When I meet vegans who are actually pro-communist and actually make excuses for Stalin or who support mass murder under communism, that's hard for me to cope with. And that's on another level from Brianna being a bit of a pain, or, you know, a guy like, you know, Passion and Fruit being a bit of a wet blanket, or whatever you want to say. So, you know, to me, those are the big questions. And if you're going to start, you've just mentioned you're only now starting to go to events in London, you're going to have those kind of conflicts. It's not even a conflict. They're just going to be people you don't like. They're people you don't want to sit next to on the train. So, you know.
I mean, I ran, talking about pancakes, I've run a stall in Camden Market selling t-shirts for the past 6 years, and I haven't found one person yet who I trust
to run it with you. Yeah.
With me.
Real talk.
I can imagine the pancake, just something as simple as washing their hands.
Right? Yeah.
Before serving food.
Yep.
I can imagine it would be interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the old days, like, this is going back 500 years, but a lot of the questions about democracy would get compared to running a ship. You know, obviously, this is before the current generation of highly technologically advanced boats. But, you know, in many ways, a ship, there is no room for democracy. It's, you know, it's stuff like, look, either you're going to wash your hands or I'm going to scream at you. It doesn't mean it's not nice. It's not friendly, but these are the kind of confrontations you get into. Well, on a boat, especially a boat made of wood, there were a lot of things like that, where it's like, look, you're doing something just slightly wrong, and I don't care about your opinion, and I'm, you know, there's a kind of tyranny built into the technology and the social organization of people on a boat. You know, today, boats, like, you know, so for many people 500 years ago, that was a reference they understood. Even if they'd only been a passenger on the boat, they'd seen the way a boat was organized. And, you know, there's upstairs and downstairs on a boat. It's totally unequal, and there's a guy who gives orders, and there are people who get literally whipped for misbehavior. Today, you know, our boat is the internet. Right? Nobody has that. An incredibly small percentage of people today have a direct experience with boat transportation. The internet, and even buying airplane tickets on the internet and flying on an airplane, we don't see any of that stuff. So, you know, an awareness of command and authority and how you can have some degree of democracy and participation and cooperation. In general, we have a whole generation of people who are really ill-prepared to deal with that stuff. That's my optimistic comment. It only gets worse.
We'll see what happens. So my idea is, instead of pancakes, hot dogs.
Oh,
simple. I'll just buy in the vegan sausages, buns, ketchup, mustard, onions, hot plate.
Okay, I've got the brand idea for you for the sign: Dead Cow Vegan Hot Dogs. And Dead Cow is in big letters, and then below Vegan Hot Dogs is in a smaller font. That's the sign. That's the concept, right?
Yeah, like it.
So people get attracted and repelled, and, you know, that's your outreach.
Yeah. I mean, where the spot I had in mind in Camden is 90% meat. The only stalls which aren't meat are kind of not meat by accident. You know, there'll be a falafel stall or something, or a smoothie stall. So it would raise a few eyebrows. If I had a picture of a dead cow with his feet in the air,
you got to keep it cute, but yeah, not a graphic image of the cow, I think, but yeah.
Or do the nice thing and say, hey, we're vegans, we're nice.
Well, you could have a smiling cow, but with X's in the eyes, you know, like a cartoon cow face. Dead Cow Vegan Hot Dogs, because the vegans will know about it anyway, and the media will be, oh, what's that? Oh, I could try that. I don't know.
Yeah, and now we're on to the topic of finding the balance.
Balance between what and what? What are we talking about?
This is the main topic. It seems to be on YouTube, the thing that people talk about endlessly. The balance between nice and nasty. And people, there seem to be multiple camps. I mean, I've seen some of the response videos about your channel. people are saying, "Oh, this is à-bas-le-ciel. He doesn't like it when people are nasty."
Yeah, I've never said anything like that on my channel, which amuses me. But go on, yeah.
I think it's something you've actually said.
Yeah.
But there are two camps. There are people who are keen on the idea of being approachable and nice and friendly, the sort of thing.
Yeah.
And people who have this aggressive approach. And I think these two communities. We get into communities now. These two approaches have kind of become polarized, and people feel like they have to choose one. There's this kind of dynamic of you should either be like Vegan Gains, or you should be this kind of approachable vegan, the nice vegan.
Yeah, well, as you can probably guess, I really don't think in those terms, and I don't fall into either camp myself, and so on. Yeah,
I think it's a helpful dichotomy that's weird.
Well, right, and also nobody really has the option to be Vegan Gains anyway. So, like, I mean, I just say if people actually phrase it in terms of should you be like Vegan Gains, most people don't have the choice to live that way.
Yeah, you can't just go into work and say to your boss, like, screw you, and throw the boss's hot dog out the window.
And also with all these things, lightning doesn't strike twice. If you set up a video channel and do exactly what Durian Rider does, or do exactly what Vegan Gains does, it's not going to mean the same thing because it's been done before. I mean, imitation is never the original thing, and so on. So, imitating in different aspects, it's partly different just because it is an imitation. Look, I mean, like my slogans and what I have to say are just from a totally different approach. On the one hand, there's my whole discourse about keeping it real. Like, if you aren't Vegan Gains, don't pretend to be Vegan Gains. If you aren't Durian Rider, don't pretend to be. Like, it would be my advice to anyone. And, I even say that to Vegan Cheetahs, don't pretend to be someone you're not, and so on. And obviously, people change too, right? I mean, even if you really were Vegan Gains 5 years ago, after 5 years, you've changed. I hope that kid changes. I mean, when I first met him, like I talked to him online just through Facebook messages. And back then, like, his channel had like maybe 4,000 subscribers. Like, it was new, and it was at that stage. So he, he replied to me because I assumed back then very few people were saying anything to him. I didn't think he was a psychopath. I thought he was in some ways typical of a kid who grew up in Toronto, and Toronto's a very hostile town, and he was kind of sulky and has a chip on his shoulder. If he did the same thing for 5 years, I think it would get boring to him. And I hope he would mature and change. So that's one side of it. Like the discourse I bring to this, I have just one video up that says, stupidity is real. I say that to people all the time in real life. Like, whether you're talking about politics or what have you, it's very easy for people to discount or disregard stupidity, to act as if things in politics are all being guided by some master plan, and that the U.S. government or the British government or the Chinese government isn't just coping short term and act. Often you have to recognize, look, these are people who may have made this decision in 5 minutes that has impacts for 30 years. I got, as one example of this, I think you'll see how this is salient. I had someone write to me who's more of a formal feminist, like, in terms of reading feminist theory and coming from a feminist political background, who was writing to me complaining about Freely under that heading, which, I haven't done on my channel. I haven't said she's an offense to feminism or women's rights or anything. And, someone else can offer that critique, obviously. But I wrote back and said, look, everything you're saying, because the message had some interesting critiques, but I said, we wouldn't be talking about this at all. We wouldn't be having this conversation if what Freely were saying was brilliant. Stupidity is real. The problem, the fundamental thing we're both criticizing, even though from totally different angles, has to do with the content, the quality of the actual content, and not to do with the form. So, coming back to your original question, is it about being nice or is it about being nasty? No, I really think it's about stupidity. I really think it's about the meaning and content of what you're actually saying and what you're doing. And in terms of activism, it's about efficacy. It's about whether or not there are real outcomes and so on. So in some ways, my approach might raise more uncomfortable questions. Like with DXE, with Direct Action Everywhere, I can say the same thing I just said about Freely. If what they had to say about the history of slavery were brilliant, were well-informed, I'd be down with it even if I disagree with it. I'd say, well, look, I disagree, but wow, I really appreciate you guys have done your homework and you've got something interesting to say. Or I might be saying, wow, I learned a lot. If what Direct Action Everywhere said about Mohandas Gandhi from the history of India, in theory, someone could do something brilliant. But my problem, this is in contrast to the offensive versus non-offensive view of the world. My problem is not, I'm offended because you dared to say something about slavery, or I'm offended because you dared to say something about India, or I'm offended because you're posing naked in a bikini or something. You could be a brilliant person making a wonderful contribution who's posing naked or in sexy photos on the internet, and you could be brilliant in making a contribution and talking about slavery or the history of India or anything else. There's a generalized lack of brilliance right now, and within my limits that include just limits of time, I'm a university student and so on. I'm trying to make what I consider a positive contribution in those circumstances. But I completely realize why people regard it as a negative contribution.
I think you're gaining some notoriety at the moment.
Sure, yeah.
But there is a lack of brilliance. I think if I was to make a defence of Freely and Dorian Ryder, then it certainly wouldn't be a defence of their brilliance, but it might be a defence actually of their stupidity.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is with Dorian Ryder, I wouldn't give him a job. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't let him clean my house or my.
Would you let him babysit your kids? Is the real question.
I wouldn't let him my dog. But it's possible.
That's pretty low. Walking your dog, that doesn't require too much trust. Okay.
He's completely useless as a human being. But one thing he's very good at is standing in front of a camera, giving his opinion. And it seems to be, if I was to do a survey on my channel, perhaps I should say, if a YouTuber caused you to go vegan, or was at least in part responsible for you going vegan, who would it be? I'd get a large number of people. I'd get a large number of answers saying Dorian Ryder.
Yep.
And I think the YouTube vegan community ecosystem is such that a lot of people will listen to Dorian Ryder, get enthusiastic about his, I feel like he is slightly contagious with his enthusiasm about cycling and bananas and so on. Watch 4 or 5 videos or 10 videos and then think, maybe this guy's not for me. But maybe Brianna Jackfruitson or who else? Unnatural vegan. Perhaps that's more my sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they will discover veganism that way. I think at the moment he has something very engaging about him. So I like to think he's pulling people into the vegan YouTube community ecosystem.
Yeah. Look, I mean, there are things I've said in the past. There are things that I appreciate about those guys. They may be in the pretty remote past in terms of their video making career, but I mean, what I'm about is keeping it real, whether that's under the heading of science or personal experience or what have you. Like in the past, when Freely just talked about how crappy it was to be a waitress. She used to work in a cocktail lounge as a waitress, and she talked about that. To me, that's as real as it gets, and that's that's something I value and think is welcome on the internet. And I'd encourage you or anyone else to make that kind of content. And one of the real benefits of that is looking back on it 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and you yourself, get to kind of immortalize those thoughts, and the honesty of it justifies the content. Now, I don't think that changes the world, to talk about what it was like being a waitress or what have you. But I, with no false humility or anything else, I really do appreciate that. how far do you want me to go with this thing? I mean, you want to change the subject, or you really want to keep talking about Freely Dirty Writer? Because I mean, I
I know you did say in your email that you hope to never have to make another video about this.
Yeah. That's how I feel about it now. I mean, I gave them a lot more credit than they deserved when I was responding to them earlier. I really thought, there were some things where it looked like they were aware of what their critics had told them, and they changed their position a little bit. And I started making my videos criticizing them really when they had posted things that retrenched their position, retrenched in the political sense, that they had reiterated that no, they still really believe the line they were selling, I don't know, more than 5 years ago. Now, I mean, it is also interesting. I don't think they're really aware of it. Some aspects of their message have faded out. In the earlier days, they were more into trying to claim that your diet could cure all diseases, quit your meds, give up, medical supervision, so on, which is both dangerous and delusory and untrue, and does make vegans look bad. I mean, if that matters, and in some ways their message has shifted. But I mean, I do not think I'm the first person to point out to them that garlic does not contain neurotoxins and so on. Many people have pointed out to them that their claims about the nature of calorie intake are just scientifically untrue. And many people have pointed out that their abuse of the so-called Minnesota starvation study is untrue. So all that's been presented to them. And again, I mean, these things are different when you're not doing it for the first time. I've recently been looking at, mass murder in the Russian Revolution, like 1918 to 1920. And even though I have read a lot of accounts of political extremism and mass murder, Cambodia, China, examples from around the world, it's still shocking and it's still horrifying. And I mean, the only concession I can make to the communist side, because it's really terrible, and it involves murdering babies, raping women, killing children, and so on, as well as adult males. Let's not omit the murder of adult males, but hey, it's all the way at least as bad as the worst things you can read from the 12th century. And in some ways it's worse, because it's happening for ridiculous ideological reasons. But in reading that, at least you can say, well, in 1920 this was new. Like, the only concession I can make is nobody had told them, if you do this, this is what's going to happen next. Because, it hadn't happened before, or it only started around, 1917. Now, an extremely intelligent person already in 1920 could have given the right advice, and a few people did. I mean, you can go through the history books and pick out the couple of people who understood what was going on and what this would lead to. But then the moral problem it presents to you, historically and still today, is now, when you know all of this was established in 1920, well, then in 1949 in China, you have this terrible burden of knowing what's going to happen next. And in many ways, totally different culture, totally different language. The same disaster does eventuate. So, yeah, to me, it's different. And this applies the whole gamut of issues we deal with here. Like, I mean, you haven't chosen to start with this, but I mean, eco-terrorism is a real question within veganism. And I said that on my channel like more than a year ago, where it was like, look, I don't really want to talk about, what color nail polish you're using. I want to acknowledge that, violence, violent protest, this kind of, it has been a big problem with animal rights. These are real issues. This was in contrast to privileged vegan at the time. I want to talk about that all the way over to lifestyle activism. It's like, well, now we're at a point where these things are repeating themselves. It's not the first time Durian Ryder has said you can eat unlimited calories and not gain weight, all the way over to it's not the first time people have said, burn down the Reichstag or whatever. I mean, like the whole range from the violent militant thing over to, lifestyle activism and the pseudoscience and, like promising you that the vegan diet is going to cure really serious illnesses, including, schizophrenia, including bipolar disorder. Now, I don't know if that makes you uncomfortable. If you've known people with serious mental illnesses, that should be shocking to you. Younger people, like if you're watching this and you're only 16 years old, you don't have direct experience with people with serious mental illness, but to give advice on the internet that somebody with a serious disorder like schizophrenia or bipolar should quit their meds and just have a high carb, low fat diet, that's shocking to me in a sense very different from people calling for mass murder or revolution or what have you.
the self-help community, there's been this long history, or a history of people engaging with mental illness and saying that it's just something you can get over. I remember Tony Robbins years ago used to say this: mental illness, you can defeat it today. You can get over it right now. And I think it's one of those things, because it's so kind of ethereal. Yep. It almost doesn't make sense why you can't get over it.
Yeah, sure.
Like anxiety or depression.
And people want to believe also, right? I mean, people...
yeah. And I'm almost tempted to say as a motivational tool, a mantra for self-improvement, you could say, I can get over this. But
yeah. Well, I don't. I really warn against that for the same reasons that I warn against, certain types of political radicalism, even though today they're not killing anybody or putting people in prison, where I see, look, down the road, this is what this leads to. A really useful historical example that's not extreme. Everyone wants to use the Nazis from history to illustrate everything. Well, it's an extreme example. But, in the middle, in terms of success and failure for vegans to study, would actually be the history of what is called Christian Science. Yeah. In many ways, Christian Science, they were a precursor to Buddhism and Hinduism in the Western world. Now, don't misquote me. Obviously, Buddhism is an ancient religion, Hinduism an ancient religion, but a lot of the stuff Buddhism and Hinduism did in the 20th century, like in the 1960s forward, actually Christian Science did 100 years earlier in the 19th century.
I can believe that.
Yeah, and Christian Science, the name sounds harmless. Christianity plus science. What's the problem? But they believe that they believe that all illness can be overcome. Not just mental illness, but physical, and like you should refuse medical treatment. Even if you get the plague or what have you. So now again, that didn't lead to mass murder like the Nazis. It didn't go that bad. And again, in terms of success, vegans need the humility to recognize this. I was just at a Jewish community center yesterday. First time in decades I've been to a Jewish community center. But we don't even have community centers. Christian Science, they built major architectural monuments all over the United States and to a lesser extent around the world. I think you have some in England. They architecturally, that's real sandstone. Some of them are really beautiful buildings built to last 1,000 years. The religion did not last. It's really falling apart now.
Yeah.
But I just say they did take it that far, where they built institutions. They had their own newspaper. They still do. They were influencing world politics in their small way. In many ways, they were much more successful than veganism ever has been, or veganism is likely to be in our lifetimes in terms of institution building, community building, what have you. But the core of their message, like Durian Rider, that's why I'm raising this. What's scary to me, like Durian Rider, and to some extent like Direct Action Everywhere. I mean, I have this problem with many different groups. The core of their message does involve what, in polite language, we would call complete bullshit. So that matters, and we got to address that from my perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was talking about before. I like to think most people don't take the whole raw to 4 thing that seriously. I don't know what percentage of people stay on it and do it properly.
Right.
Honestly, I think the problem with all this stuff is that there's no real data. It's all... We don't know how many people in the world have done raw to 4, done it properly, eaten the requisite number of carbs, the requisite amount of fat, so on. Yeah,
but dude, I got to say, the other side of it is, and I actually, this guy Tobias, who I've disagreed with, and it's polite intellectual disagreement, but we have clashed, and you can see videos on my channel. I'm actually not that interested in the macro scale of talking about thousands of people or millions of people. For my life, I want to know one person. I want to know 5 people, And I'm taking a step. I'm being really honest and really real with you guys about that. I wish I had 5 vegan friends who could cooperate with me about anything, and I don't. One of the reasons why I'm that honest, just to mention briefly, before this YouTube channel, I had a vegan blog that was briefly really popular. It was getting 40,000 hits on stuff. It didn't last long, but briefly some of my stuff got really a lot of attention. And obviously it's all from other vegans. Right? That's the other thing to remember is don't kid yourself. This is all about preaching to the converted. So that's also why have a more edgy and challenging message? Why ask the hard questions? Because, that's who I'm talking to. I'm talking to people who've already accepted the basic idea of veganism. But people used to send me fan mail to that blog that really assumed I was something I wasn't. No matter how many times I said again and again, look, I'm just one person. I'm a regular dude. I'm not at the head of a huge organization like People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. I'm not this, I'm not that. People would kind of glorify in their mind who I was and what I was doing. So yeah, the big questions you're asking, like, I don't know, on an epidemiological scale, what's effective in terms of diet or activism or anything else? I'm worried about the next 5 years of my life. I'm worried about whether or not I know 5 people who I can make pancakes with or do anything with. And it's not false humility when I'm saying I don't know those people. And it's not a hollow insult when I say, I look at the Thai Fruit Festival. If I go there, I'm not going to meet those 5 people. I'm not saying that as a meaningless insult. That's my life. That's what I'm looking at. That's what I'm trying to get done, right?
What do you think would happen if Durian Rider tomorrow said, listen, guys, I've decided I'm not going to eat any meat apart from chicken. It's improved my cadence. I cycled up twice a step. I shaved off 10 seconds. And, like he does, it's one animal. It's only got a limited degree of sentience. Don't be what did he say? Don't be a shit cunt. Harden the fuck up. Eat some chicken.
Well,
I think he'd take people with him.
I think it's a shame that you use Durian Rider as an example, because in his case, no, he'd be shunned because that's kind of the only redeeming quality he's got. No, I think.
Let's say freely.
No. Well, no. The real contrast is to people like Sam Harris, who really do that. The sort of self-styled intellectual.
Has he done that?
Well, yeah. He went in the past. He went vegan, and then he went back, and then he went vegan, and then he said, it's one of those things where he's a fence sitter. And other voices. On my own channel, I've mentioned a bunch of these guys from the new atheist movement. Who in some respects are legitimate public intellectuals, and in some respects are kind of faking it because they move outside of their own area of expertise. A lot of those guys have taken mixed positions on animal rights like that. Or whatever. They're opposed to vivisection and they're opposed to veal, but they still do eat meat once in a while. So I think those are the real world examples of that and the real questions. But with Durian Rider, no, I think there's no ambiguity, because his, ultimately what he's selling is just a diet. If you have a more complex package that you're selling that involves, separation of church and state, like these atheist guys, or anything else, then it would be a more complicated scenario.
I believe that the YouTube community, the online vegan activist community, whatever you want to call it, has become more decentralized in the past 12 months, 2 years. I feel like we no longer have Harley and Freely as the king and queen, and the rest kind of coming down from them. I think there's a lot of other channels have grown, like 50,000 subscribers plus.
Yeah. Look, the other side of it is who watches YouTube anyway. I've never expected my channel to have a big following. I'll tell you, people in Cambodia don't watch YouTube. When I lived in Cambodia, I never once watched a YouTube video. People in mainland China don't either, for other reasons. And like within the Western world, in terms of both the audience I am reaching, the audience I could reach, that's very different from a magazine. It's also a good question. If you publish a vegan magazine or an animal rights, who do you reach? Some people read magazines, some people don't. And, is it a more academic magazine? Does it have pictures of naked women in it? Like, because really, you could do a Playboy-style magazine. In its heyday, Playboy was famous, like during the Cold War, for having some of the best journalists. It wasn't, in addition to having pictures of naked women. Oh, yeah. So, I just say the whole range would be possible, but then you'd also have to admit, okay, this is going to reach a very different audience from YouTube. But I've said this repeatedly on my channel, and it's really sincere. What I'm doing on my channel, I do not think of as activism. This is like talking to me in a cafe. And talking to me in a cafe is pretty intimidating. A lot of people, are not prepared for the level of intellectual content I bring to a casual conversation. But I do. And compared to spending my time in an actual cafe, talking to an actual vegan who happens to live in Victoria, it's a better use of my time than that, because whatever, it reaches you. It may reach at least a couple hundred people who are interested. But that's all I can say for it. Like, I don't think in these more grandiose terms about the effects of YouTube. And the other big thing, as you already know, is one day my daughter can see as much of this as she wants. Yeah.
I think it's firstly the effects of YouTube. Is when I go to places like VegFest, I'm always surprised that people have never heard of, they don't know about Freely the Banana
Right.
Girl.
Right.
I think we tend to forget this because
right.
We've got this kind of insulated nature. And
if you go to a hardcore animal rights conference too, like these bitter old people who fought for 20 years to close down one laboratory, because a lot of those struggles are really long term. Those people also, I think you'll find they don't know about any of this stuff, or they ignore it. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah. And the other thing is, in YouTube itself, there's this problem of so many people make a new channel, make a very exciting video about why dairy is bad,
right?
And only vegans will watch it,
right? Totally.
And then they make 2 or 3 videos why you should stop eating chicken,
right? So
only vegans will watch it.
That was the one thing Steve Best was dead right about. So I disagree with Steve Best about everything, but exactly the point you just made. He said activism cannot be 1,000 blogs, each written by one person and each being read only by the converted, and the same with blogs or YouTube. He said it about blogs. But no, what you're saying is absolutely right. And at least I'm aware of the problem, but a lot of people are sincerely deluded about it, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I've had probably about, in the 2 years I've been doing YouTube, maybe 5 emails from people saying that thank you very much, have considered veganism thanks to your videos. And these are mostly people that I met. It used to be a Dungeons and Dragons channel.
Oh, really?
Hangers on from the Dungeons and Dragons days have messaged me about vegan content. I don't know. Yeah, it's a very difficult issue due to the YouTube algorithms making a video about why you should avoid meat and dairy and actually getting it watched.
Yeah, but look, it depends on what the meaning of life is for you also, right? So Kenya came to fame by making a very silly video. I don't mean that in a bad way, but she made a silly video, a music video, singing about veganism, and I don't know, let's say over 1 million people have seen it. The actual number is irrelevant. Look, I've known people. I've mentioned on my channel, I have a little bit of a background in the entertainment industry and acting and knowing those types of people. There are some people for whom that is the meaning of life. They want to be on that stage. They want to make you laugh. They want to make you smile. And they feel so gratified by making that silly video. I'm not that dude. That's not who I am. And for somebody who is like that, whether they're a stand-up comedian or a musician or what have you, of course you're happy for them if they make a silly video like that and they happen to break through or what have you. But what you opened your comment by saying was to talk about actual, conversions. The idea of conversion is already complicated and loaded because it's not a religion, right? It's, are we really talking about conversion? But of speaking to an audience of meat eaters and of that being effective, okay, well, do I really believe that seeing a silly music video like that will convert people? Well, I'll give you the really honest answer. Yes, but the type of person who would convert for that reason is someone I would have contempt for. You know, like, let's keep it all the way real. I knew a dude in Toronto. I could say a lot of bad things about this dude. He later got involved in different kinds of drugs, and he kept getting women pregnant. And, you know, when you're on drugs, it's easy to get people pregnant by accident and so on. You know, I sympathize up to a point, but, I mean, I kind of despise this guy. When I asked him how he became vegetarian in the first place, because I was trying to get him to go from vegetarian to vegan, which normally is easy. I mean, as mentioned, if people are already vegetarian, normally they'll take the next step. And he actually was a guy who converted because of a pamphlet. You know, someone handed him a pamphlet on a university campus. And, like, you know, I didn't tell him I thought he was an idiot, but I was looking at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? And, you know, I mentioned there were other reasons why I wonder what the hell is wrong with him. But, like, this is me being 100% honest. Handing out pamphlets. Will that convert some people? Apparently, yes. I mean, I know at least one example where the guy got the pamphlet and said, okay, I'm going to change my whole life. But that's not what I'm chasing, you know. And again, it's just admitting my own prejudice and what have you. So the silly side of it, which I don't hate on. But, you know, I think those are questions everybody has to ask themselves. You also do not seem to me like you want a life as an entertainer, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you'll turn over a new leaf. Maybe you want to be the next Kenya.
I've dabbled in entertainment.
Yeah.
I think part of my problem is in life as well as YouTube, I have trouble focusing on one thing.
Yeah.
I like to think of myself as a Renaissance man, but reality, I'm more of a jack of all trades.
Yeah. Well, I just mentioned I'm the opposite. I have tremendous focus, and my whole life has been a struggle to try to specialize, to try to focus on one issue. But I've been forced to stop and start again many, many times. And just now, right now, I'm looking at moving to China. So for the last year, academic year, it's much less than 12 months. For the last year, I've been studying Japanese. It's just like, okay, like what? I throw all those books in the garbage, stop doing Japanese, switch to Chinese. And in the past, it was like, well, I don't know if you know this, but, you know, the government of Laos is a communist country. They threatened to kill me and kick me out of the country. It was this very dramatic situation. It's like, okay, so I've been working on the politics, history, and language of Laos for 2.5 years. Just like, okay, stop everything. What's next? Cambodia? Myanmar? Just start. So I actually really dislike that about my life. I would have loved to have been able to become a specialist in any sense, but actually my knowledge is incredibly broad, both by academic discipline and geography and language, and that's something that's been forced on me, but is not a natural part of my character.
So I've got 2 pages here.
Oh, we didn't even start the pages. But look, hey, this is really substantial. I thought you were going to ask me about cricket or something. I mean, all right, cool. But we can. I mean, I'm partly doing this as a way to get to know you and so on. I mean, I'm cool with whatever, you know.
I mean, we don't have to do the pages. I can just tell you what. I almost did email you the pages.
Yeah.
I've actually touched on a few of these. Like I said, introduction. What are your goals setting up this channel? We've kind of covered that. So à-bas-le-ciel.
Yeah.
Lily's translated it. She thinks it means under the sky, but I've gone to Google Translate, and they say under the low sky.
Yeah. Well, Google Translate is less than omnipotent. One of the things that amuses me about this is that if you just do a normal Google search for the phrase, you do get a great example of its usage translated into English. And that is from a book that's been digitized on Google Books, which is actually a traditional Christian criticizing French revolutionaries, you know, some of whom were very anti-Christian, as you know, in the various revolutions in France. And he quotes it and translates it as an example of a radical call to arms used in one or another of the French revolutions. So the sense here of à-bas you will find in many political slogans such as à-bas-l'État. So that doesn't mean the state is low. That is down with the state, tear down the state. And so this is a more absurd political slogan with a very precise double meaning, because it does literally mean tear down the sky. But in French, sky and heaven are twinned. So it also means tear down heaven, or even in a sense, let's tear God out of its heaven. Let's bring down the sky. Let's bring down the gods. So it's a kind of rapacious political slogan with a kind of very profound horizon set for activism. So this is the sense in which it was used, and it has always amused me. So I guess I've now let the cat out of the bag. And if anyone watches this video, which is now past around 50 minutes or what have you, I guess that gives away the game. But I was wondering if anyone would ever write to me who just took the time to Google it, because you could get that answer just out of Google. But to my knowledge, nobody ever did. But hey, maybe 1,000 people did, and they just don't bother writing to me because they Googled it. They figured us out. Okay, interesting, cool. Well, I can ask you the same question. Why did you name your channel The Violent Vegan? So,
yeah, I was going to call it The Vegan Jew.
Oh,
The Naked Vegan Jew.
You know what? The Violent, that's better. No, don't. Yeah. You had a marketing committee. Think about that one, did you?
Yeah, because I not anymore. I used to regularly get people saying they're not really very violent.
Yeah. Well, I was just wondering, though, does Judaism matter to you in that way? I mean, because your channel, you don't really talk about it that much.
No, Judaism matters to me as a hobby.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to describe it. I gained some amount of spiritual fulfillment in a secular sense.
Yeah.
In a very reform sort of sense. We do some of the rituals, like Friday night candle lighting sometimes, and we're a member of a synagogue. But in the true reform tradition, I could just as easily classify myself as an atheist.
Yeah. Well, I'll just mention, because I think you wouldn't guess this about me. And again, this is partly just getting to know each other and so on. I have looked into migrating to Israel, despite the fact that I am an open atheist and identify as a nihilistic atheist. And just a couple weeks ago, I applied for a job in Poland, in a charming town you may have heard of called Auschwitz. Okay. Have you heard of it? I hear it's a great town. Yeah. Auschwitz-Birkenau, the former death camp, is now a museum, and I was applying to basically be a museum employee, whatever you want to say there. And I do have some of my past jobs have been in museums, so I don't think they're going to give me the job, but these are ways in which I would say Jewishness and the historical shadow cast by Judaism is still important in my life. And I mean, anti-Semitism is also, it gives you a kind of profound insight into so many different societies and so many periods in history. I mean, anti-Semitism is a big deal. I've just been doing some Russian politics in Russian history, but in Spain, all over the world. This is a really short anecdote I can tell you. I used to work for the government of Laos. Okay. And when I worked in this, so it's a communist country, so everyone's a communist official. And my boss there, he was an historian. He was also, a bureaucrat and worked for the Communist Party, but he cared about history and, he was actually writing a dictionary at that time. So, he was styled himself as a bit more intellectual than the average Communist Party bureaucrat. And I remember one day I was talking about slavery and racism. Yeah, I forget if it was in the British Empire in Australia, but we did talk about this stuff at the office. And he said to me in his broken English, "Yes, and you know why you care about that? Because you are Jew." And he was smiling. He was just proud of himself that he'd figured out that I was Jewish. And I laughed. I mean, I wasn't offended. And, almost nobody in that country even knows what the word Jew means. Like, it's, and I also laughed because, hilariously, it is partly true. There is a sense in which I care more about slavery and what have you because of that background, even though, as I say, I'm a complete atheist and what have you. So that's come up, despite the fact that my own work has had so much to do with Asia and what have you. That's still a shadow in my life. And when I was talking to people, because I got on the phone with the actual Israeli bureaucrats connected to that, and I don't know if you've talked to any of those people. I don't know. Maybe anyway, after, why don't you say if you have any connections with Israel, what have you? But you could really hear in the tone of their voice, some of the Israeli government officials I spoke to genuinely believed Israel was a wonderful place to move to, and some of them thought it was pretty terrible, and were like, "You sure you want to do that?" Like, what? I just said to them uniformly, I was like, "Hey, I coped with Cambodia. I think I can cope with what Haifa would throw at me or what have you." So anyway, it is what it is.
Yeah, my wife she lived in Israel. She made Aliyah when she was 19.
Oh, wow!
Stayed there until her mid-20s, and they've recently downgraded her passport. Because she hasn't lived there for some number of years, 7 or 10 years, so she can no longer have a proper Israeli passport.
They want that tax money. Yeah, go on. They do. They care about that. Yeah.
So yeah, and she was genuinely quite upset that she something in the Jewish psyche perhaps about being rejected by
sure
by the land of Israel, much like Moses.
Well, if she went at 19, she would have done military service of some kind and so on.
She did. I think she did maybe like about 3 days in the army.
Okay. But she killed a lot of people in those 3 days. Man, it was a bloodbath.
Yeah, I don't know what she actually did during those 3 days, but it wasn't much.
We don't talk about it.
Yeah. I think firstly Israel, it would just be too hot for me.
Yeah.
That's the number one problem. Secondly, I don't know. I'd be happy, to be honest, never to leave the UK ever again.
Yeah.
I don't really have the travel bug.
Yeah. Well, I'm half like you and half unlike you, because I have actually never had the travel bug. I have never wanted to travel. I've always been trying to minimize my travel, to travel as little as possible. But as you know, circumstance forced me to travel a lot. And on the other hand, I hate England. English culture is impossible for me to deal with. And like every day in England is a struggle. And I would not want to live in England. And I say England specifically, not Britain or the UK, because in my experience, Ireland really is different. Scotland really is different. I've never been to Wales. Wales may or may not be culturally different. But wow, I find England absolutely impossible to cope with. So, and I've had, just because, so many of the vegans who are online, guys like Ali Tabrizi and stuff have said to me, "Oh, when are you next coming back to the UK? Like, come and visit." Like, he's being friendly. And it's like, my dude, like, if I were offered $100,000 to go to England, like, I'd really have to, it's at that level of, like,
There's England and there's London. I think London doesn't feel like England. It feels more like a cultural helipad.
Yeah. Well, I'm not faulting you. I mean, it's obviously there are things to like about England. There's also the question of how you fit into it, right? But like, I'm aware the British cannot deal with me, and my ex-wife really had the same problem, and she perceived it more when she was with me because I was pointing out to her. Like she didn't always realize, but like I've mentioned this on my channel. The Americans tend to be very self-confident in their own egos, and they're happy if you're self-confident, and that's fine. And, this comes up in so many things in life. Chinese culture is even better for me. I feel really good, like in Kunming, in other parts of China. I had more friends in Kunming than anywhere else I've lived in the world. And, like if you're tall and strong and handsome and self-confident in China, that's good. And like in England, all of those things are kind of bad. And there's always these strange games being played about humbling yourself. And the British are dishonest in a way that's a problem for me, and they expect you to be dishonest too, even down to really simple things. So like, like I talk to a lot of people with PhDs, research of different kinds has been a big part of my life. When I talk to a British dude, like my own age or younger included, this is not about people more than 6, but like the current generation, and he mentions something, whatever we're talking about the history of Myanmar, the history of Sri Lanka, whatever, because I've got background in all these things. I'd say, oh, so do you know the book that came out in 2012 on that? There was a new book on that specific subject. And the British guy would say, yeah. Oh, well, do you know his thesis on that? Because he says the exact opposite of what you were just saying. So, like, have you read it? Like I'm trying to continue the conversation. Yeah. Dude, I can lend you my copy of the book. Have you read it or not? You would never have this problem with an American. Not with a New Yorker, not with a Texan, not with a Californian. Either you've read the book or you haven't. I'm not insulting you. I'm not challenging you. I'm trying to be helpful to you. I'm trying to tell you about a book that's relevant to your work. And in England, like, this is only one symbolic example, but you get into really heavy conflicts with people all the time, from my perspective, for no justifiable reason. And to me, ethically, this is a problem, but it's also just a problem in your life that I don't, whether or not I can cope with it, I do not want to cope with it. So yeah, for me, I would rather live in China than England, even though obviously China is a tough place in some ways.
It is a peculiar thing. I mean, it's some kind. There is some kind of English disease. I found myself in that situation where somebody will say, "Oh, have you seen this film?" And I'll instinctively say, "Yes."
Oh, yes, of course.
And then I'll think, "Why did I say yes?" What's the reason? And then they'll follow up with a question, and how am I going to dig myself out of this? So you can either double down, or think of some. I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah, it's weird, and there's like a sense of like, with a film, I don't know, would that only be for something like Citizen Kane, a film you were supposed to have seen? Because like a lot of the time when I was dealing with the British, it would be about stuff I wouldn't expect them to know. Like a book that's obscure, a book that was published in India, and I'm telling you about it because it's useful to you. But there was a book published on that topic in India. Like, do you know about it? Don't tell me, yeah. Say, oh, I don't know about it. I'm interested. Tell me about it. How can I, but yeah, that's a huge problem. And in politics, like I know political history. Some of the political history I know is secret, like, in the sense of CIA secret. And some of it is just obscure. Like nobody knows it because very few people who speak English care about politics in Laos or Cambodia or even China. It's actually sad. Anyway, China, you might think there's a high level of knowledge, but there isn't. Japan is even more depressing. But, like if I'm trying to talk to a British person, and I find this with Australians too. Australians are maybe not quite as bad. But it's like, oh, no, but there was that war in 1989 on the border between Thailand and Laos, and that's the reason why. Do you know about that? Have you already read about that? And that yeah thing, that's the wrong answer. How can I do anything with you? How can we cooperate? How can we work together? Anyway, final thing on that and why I can't cope with the British. So like I talk all the time within veganism. This brings it back to veganism, so it's a good segue. But I talk about like, can we get a magazine going? Can we get something positive going? I used to talk about that with academics too, including like people who studied Buddhism, people who studied Asia. It's like, well, can we collaborate and get some kind of project going? And I remember one of the realest answers I got. I said this to a university. He was professor emeritus, so he had a lot of free time. Retired professor, and I was talking to him about cooperation in this sense. And he said to me, totally self-confident, he said, "Yes, a lot of people say that, but can you tell me this? What does the word cooperation really mean?" And he assumed, he's used to talking to British students, he assumed he would have stumped me. Like, I'm guessing the average British student says, boy, I never thought about it that way before. But, I mean, you've heard me on this channel talking about that on veganism. It's like, yes, actually, I have a really robust answer to exactly what I mean by cooperation, whether we're talking about pancakes or political organization or writing a magazine or putting together a dictionary, like language research projects. You can't do a language research project with one person. You need a group. So yeah, there you go. These are not the only reasons I dislike English culture, but this is my explanation. Sorry.
part of the problem is that we hate conflict, interpersonal, until it's at that boiling point.
Yeah.
Then maybe we'll have a row, but up until that point, we'd rather say yes.
Yeah, but yo, man, I used to live in Glasgow, though, man. Like you say that you British, man, you were a bunch of killers, man.
Maybe
like, oh man, when I was living in Cambridge, I was living in a small town outside of Cambridge, England, and I remember the newspaper, not on the front page even, one day said, "Oh, the police discovered a severed human ear in front of the local pub." You know, it wasn't a nightclub. It was one of those local British pubs, which is nothing, you know. And you know, would anyone missing an ear please report to the police? The police have already spoken to every hospital in the region, and none of them reported anyone who came with a severed ear, like, you know, within this time. That's England. England to me is two guys in the lineup at the grocery store trying to start a fist fight with an American guy. Cambridge, you know, this is not even Glasgow. No. So, I mean, in terms of violence popping off, I think a lot of Americans don't realize that. They think New York is tough. They think, you know, because our culture, our mainstream media exaggerates that. But no, the English, you guys bring the fight to everyone. I mean, the level of violence is high. And obviously, in terms of history, colonialism, and everything else, you know, you guys rumbled all over the world, man.
Well, I think what it is, for the English mindset, there's not much of a midway point.
Yeah, you could be right.
Hello, how do you do? Would you like a cup of tea?
Right.
And would you like a fight right now? For example, my wife's American, and people are, if she gets a little bit vocal in a standard conversation,
right,
people will think, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you," and you know, she's not offended. She's just she's just being herself. And even me, we've been married for like 7 years. Even me, I was saying, well, I'm sorry, why are you offended? And I'm not offended.
Yeah.
I think we don't have much of a kind of ramp up between just general calm and fly off the handle.
Yep. Yeah, it's a big problem. And you know, I've always felt it was ironic because the British seem to me culturally to be like the worst culture for democracy. You know, maybe Cambodia is worse, but that inability, because the British are like that about money too. They can't deal with financial negotiations. They cannot deal with talking about money. They're infamous for that. And it's like, look, actually one of the prerequisites for democracy is being able to sit down and have those real conversations and recognize conflict, recognize, you know, contrasts in opinion and belief and agenda, and not, you know, react in this way. Not either suppress it and pretend the conflict doesn't exist, which is one side of the British character, and not go to the other extreme either. So yeah, there you go. I hope I've convinced you to come join me in China instead of remaining in England.
Maybe it's the language barrier.
No.
I believe in the immersion technique. If I could live there for a few months.
Sure. You could check it out. But the problem would not be language. If you come to China, you got to cut your hair. That's the first requirement. You got to cut your hair and you got to change your wardrobe. That's not negotiable. But actually speaking Chinese, but no, you got to suit up. So that's the cost. That's the barrier to entry.
So see if we got anything else interesting on here. Where do you stand on cockles and mussels?
Okay, it's actually, my answer to that is more interesting than you might think. I did a lot of research on oysters. It was very memorably within my first couple of weeks of being a university student. So that would have been 1997. And I went down to the library and I got out these wonderful books on the science of oysters that were really from the period when scientists were first figuring it out. So 19th century and early 20th century. And now that's because it wasn't the top priority for science. You know, it's not that oysters were that mysterious. But, you know, there was a time when scientists actually did not know how oysters reproduced. You know, like the sexuality, it's not obvious. You look at an oyster, you can't figure it out. And when they didn't know about their level of intelligence, when those were sincere questions. So I actually read a lot about them back then. And this is something I was asked about back when I had a blog and what have you. Now, I think the most useful way to answer the question in real life, like face to face with people who are vegans who are actually in doubt about this, I generally talk about doing good. And that's really a very simple concept that's been out of style for a long time, where it's like, look, I'm not actually interested in an ontological problem of whether or not oyster intelligence exists. Now, actually, I've done the reading. Actually, there is plenty of scientific evidence that oyster intelligence exists, but admittedly, oysters are not going to invent the atom bomb, but, neither are cows. It's sort of, to me, that's really not the question. I think the point is, look, if you are asking yourself, how can I do good? How can I help? Which are relative questions, and sometimes you can't help. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. But in reference to something like oysters and mussels, I just do not see how that broad, basic framework of trying to do good would lead you to the train of thought of saying, you're stupid enough for me to kill you and eat your flesh. Now, the exception to the rule, this hasn't been that lighthearted a conversation, but I could put to you, if you were abandoned on Dayutai Island, which is a rocky, rainy, cold island. It's not a jungle island in the middle of the ocean. And you literally, let's say you're abandoned with Henya and Supreme Banana. It's you three. All three are vegan YouTubers on this island. Your only sources of food are birds' eggs that will be fertilized, possibly fish, but obviously you have to suffer more to go out and get the fish, or possibly oysters. Which one is going to be the least revolting to you, morally and physically? Like, I think I'd vomit a lot if I was forced to survive in those conditions. I don't know, like forcing yourself to eat a fertilized bird egg, raw or cooked, is very, for me, would be very hard to do. Wouldn't be a pleasure. But yeah, I can come up with scenarios where it is the lesser of two evils, if you can wait out and get some oysters. However, as I like to say, the lesser of two evils is still evil. And for me, there's no justification, and there isn't even reason to be asking those questions in living my life. Living my life not on a desert island, and not on Senkaku Island of all places. So there you go.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up the way I feel as well. I just like the way veganism doesn't ask these questions, like doesn't break down animals in terms of intelligence.
Yeah.
Or what they can do for us, and so on.
Well, that's the current fashion. But as a point on my channel, I didn't know if we talk about this or not, but you have a long enough memory. You can remember the old days of activism, of these anarchists breaking through the fence at the Glastonbury Festival or what have you. You can remember a very different paradigm, and it's going to change again. So, I don't think what you've just mentioned is very true today, but it wasn't true 10 years ago, and I don't think it'll be true 10 years from now.
Yeah. Did you want to talk about domestication?
Yeah, boy. Do you want to say something first, though? I mean, why don't we ask about your views? Because, you've heard what I've said up to a point.
Yeah, okay. So, my view is, firstly, I don't think it's as simple. I don't think it's black and white, but I would say in terms of, say, dogs and cats, the most obvious ones, should we be keeping dogs and cats? I think the answer is no, ultimately. I've decided we have a rescue dog, and one of our dogs passed away recently. We're going to get another rescue dog. So, in my lifetime, I can't see there being a shortage of rescue dogs. I know there's this argument that perhaps dogs and cats chose us, and they've been successful as a species because of their unique bond with us. But I would say it's a bit of a liability for them. I know people like to talk about how we eat pigs but love dogs, but I actually sometimes wonder if we are that far away from eating cats and dogs.
You are looking at someone who has lived in an Aka village in northern Laos where dogs are on the menu like 7 days a week, my G. There are not that many cultures in the world that eat dogs on like a daily basis, but the Aka, they regard a dog as a staple of the diet. They absolutely think of a dog in the way that people in Europe think of a pig. Absolutely, they do. And in general, they don't have pigs. They have dogs. And when you approach an Aka village, so Aka is the name of the ethnic group, the first sight on the side of the road are the latest fresh dog skins drying in the sun. It looks satanic. As a wicker framework and dog skins being stretched out. So they skin dogs, they use dog fur, dog leather, and they eat dogs. And that's their social economy. Anyway, sorry, do go on. But yeah, there's nothing inevitable about that relationship, to be sure.
As far as you mentioned, vegan activism, showing people, saying a pig can be cuddly and a pet just like a dog. I don't know. I guess that has some effectiveness. But as to the actual question, should we be involved with these creatures? Probably not. Yeah. At least not in the terms of, at least not in terms of bringing them into our houses, keeping them as pets, so on.
Well, look, I mean, there's sort of so much for me to say on this, and it's something I've kind of had a note to eventually make a video about. But I mean, I think the reason why so many vegans can't cope with the question currently, because again, 15 years ago it was totally different. Like anti-domestication was a pillar of animal rights and of the whole anarcho-primitivist attitude, which was really much bigger than anarcho-primitivism. It influenced a lot of people in terms of the questions being asked. And even, there used to be like punk rock music for vegans from that era, and a lot of it was ranting against pet ownership and domestication. Those were the big issues at that time. So, things change. But in terms of the fragility of vegans today on this issue, I think it comes back to one of the questions I raised on my channel, which is people thinking about anything in terms of the government kicking down your door and taking your rights away. So a lot of vegans react with, well, if you think domestication is problematic, like we don't even say bad, we don't say, if you think it's problematic, then what you're saying is when you become a tyrant controlling the world the day after tomorrow, you're going to make it illegal and you're going to take away my dog or cat from me, and I love my dog or cat so much. Mm-hmm. And I completely understand how Western culture conditions people to think that way. As I've said, the abortion debate is a really raw example of that. Where, if you think abortion is problematic in any way, therefore, this is the logical extension of what you believe. So anything being said to be problematic or complex is reacted in this way. And this is just another example where I think that's totally counterproductive and prevents any clear thinking or clear planning on the issue. Is that? I mean, I can say more. I was going to make a video of my own on that, but I mean, maybe that's enough to say about domestication for now.
No, that's about it. At some point, I want to make a video on dog breeding. I think that's something I can personally make some headway in, sharing it around and in dog forums. I think people don't. There's a lot of ignorance in the world as to the fact that dog breeding is just inbreeding, and the fact that I've become aware we've just lost a dog to a horrific genetic heart disease. Yeah, and caused by effectively inbreeding, which is, people don't realize that's what dog breeding is. I had this idea to make a video. Aliens take over the world. They see somebody like Freely the Banana Girl, and they want to make a whole bunch of clones. So they take her mom and dad, make them reproduce, bring in her cousins, make them have children until they get a whole species of human that looks like Freely the Banana Girl, boys and girls, and then make them produce. What could possibly go wrong further down the line with such a limited gene pool?
Yeah.
Anyway.
One of the things I learned from my period of having the blog before YouTube also is that these questions are very different when people are implicitly thinking about the past as opposed to thinking about the future. Now, I'm unusual. One of the reasons why I neither fit into the left wing nor the right wing, I really don't. Like in Canada, there's no place for me, neither in the left nor in the right, nor in the middle. I mean, like, you know, our centrist party, I really couldn't get along with. I actually care a lot about tradition. I care a lot about the past, and that relates to, you know, First Nations and all kinds of things in politics. And it's also the reason why I didn't become vegan sooner in my life, was really this kind of sense of respect for ancestral and ancient things. And I care about ancient Greece and ancient, you know, I just care about tradition, period, in terms of anthropology and politics and everything else. But, you know, domestication of dogs. Here in Canada, we have a real question of whether or not our indigenous dog breed will go extinct. So that's the breed of dog that was here before Europeans arrived. You know, the dogs that native people had here. Turns out nobody was paying attention. And, you know, as you can imagine, the European dog breeds were imported and, you know, the indigenous breed is more or less driven to extinction. Some scientists found a few villages where they've still got this breed of dog. And, of course, that would have been the type of dog that was used to pull sleds and everything else before Europe, because it was a work animal for our native people. They didn't have horses. They had dogs. It was the cornerstone work animal for their existence. In that context, I do think it's meaningful to prevent that breed from going extinct. And, you know, there were a lot of things traditionally I'd like to see prevented from going extinct, at least in the sense of a museum-type experience, not in the sense of millions of animals being killed for no reason. But, you know, we actually, if you as a tourist want to come to Canada and see our ancient traditions, we don't have a Disney World you can go to, you know, and other countries do. You know, other countries say, hey, you know, you want to see what medieval Japan is like? You can go visit a medieval Japanese temple or tower or castle where they recreate that historical period. So, I mean, there is some role for recreation and preservation of traditional culture in miniature. It's definitely not factory farming. You know, but, you know, to prevent that dog breed from going extinct or to have some example of what life was like, I think that is meaningful. On the other hand, are there any dogs on the Starship Enterprise? Are there any dogs on the space shuttle with NASA going into orbit? Today, are there dogs in the hallway of the House of Parliament? In a real sense, I think that's not meaningless either. When we're talking about the future, when we're talking about excellence, what's good in our own culture, you know, and what we're building for the future, the role for domesticated animals, I think, is almost zero, or you could argue that it's absolutely zero, that there's no acceptable role for domesticated animals at all. But, you know, again, outside of, I mean, you know, a zoo also, habitat preservation, you know, having a habitat park, you know, a curated historical park. This is about the only kind of fishbowl, you know, fishbowl as opposed to the ocean, where I can think of our society in the future preserving some of these things. But outside of that, no. I mean, there's just almost no room for and no legitimate role for domesticated animals. And we as vegans are some of the worst offenders. I got sympathy. But you probably know vegans also where their whole life is around, you know, their pet pig or whatever it is, man.
Was it Theravāda Buddhism?
I hate to tell you, it's a hard TH. It's Terra, yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Theravāda, yeah.
Okay. So I made a little Buddhist section on my.
Cool. Well, I'm happy to talk about it, and if it gets too scandalous, we can edit it out afterward. So far, I think we got no edits. So yeah, it's been great so far. Right. All right, sure.
How long were you Buddhist for?
I could use 10 years as a round figure. It would be painful for me to try to think more precisely about, you know, when did it start and when did it stop. But yeah, okay, let's say 10 years.
Okay, and my next question is, what was it about it that seduced you?
Yeah, well, the answer has to include some mention of the ways in which I was not seduced. So you probably already know this about me, but I never believed in the supernatural aspects. I never became a convert, even to the yoga aspects. Like, I was never into the softcore aspects. I was never into kung fu. And I'm not saying that to insult anybody, but
no, that's a big draw.
Yeah. A lot of guys, it's exactly what they're into, is the kung fu or other softcore elements. So my approach to it was really much more like someone studying ancient Greek and getting, really committed to studying Aristotle and Socrates or whatever example you want to use. But the difference is that I really felt this is a philosophy and this is a tradition that has something very positive to offer to the world today. Now, maybe some people feel that way about Socrates. I haven't met any. That's actually a real, when you think about it, that's a real blow to the whole premise of Western civilization. Have you talked to anyone who really believes, like we're talking about politics in China. Have you ever met anyone who says, what the Chinese need? They need the philosophy of Socrates. Maybe they do. Maybe, politics in China would be improved if we had a really excellent translation of Socrates into modern Chinese and we had some kind of philosophical progress of that kind. But again, nobody believes that. So, for me, in my life and my frame of reference, both in looking at a country like Canada or looking at Europe, but even more if you're talking about Thailand, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, I saw Theravāda Buddhism still as something that had a meaningful, positive contribution to make to life on Earth today. So that's how it's different. And, in terms of the core values, if you ask, you haven't asked, but if one were to ask, what can you believe in or what can you preach if you don't believe in the supernatural aspect? I'll tell you right now, all is impermanent, to live is to suffer, and there is no soul. These are the three core tenets, and they have quite far-reaching implications. Now, they're also pretty close to nihilism, and a lot of Europeans get excited for that reason. But sure, that was, in terms of the real philosophical edge to Theravāda Buddhism, which is set out in the ancient language, in the ancient written canon, in contrast to Hindu philosophies that competed with it. Sure, there was material there that I could positively identify with and that I could preach, and that I could imagine myself for decades and decades and into my old age being an old man, believing in and supporting and preaching. So that was very appealing. Now, I just mentioned my own sort of traditionalism. Not everyone's like that. That's part of my character. I want a tradition. I still want one. I can't have one. And it's a personal tragedy for me. I want to be part of a culture that I don't despise. It's not going to be British culture. It's not going to be English culture. It's not going to be British Empire. But growing up in Canada, yeah, it is very sad for me that I don't have a culture, even on the level of a literary tradition, that's mine. And I talk about Shakespeare a fair bit in my channel. I mention him as an example. I don't hate Shakespeare, but it doesn't have that meaning for me. And it does for some people. For some people, that's really their literature, and they care about it, and it's meaningful for them that way. There you go, man.
Shakespeare has a meaning for me.
Yeah.
His continual reverence towards the class system, just is a stumbling block.
Well, I don't want to digress into a critique of Shakespeare. We could, but
I just can't appreciate the beauty of Shakespeare because it's always there. I think it had to be because it was performed with. It was performed in front of royals and such like. You had to continually reinforce this idea that people of a certain class were just intrinsically better.
Well, I remember, just to be honest about that, when I was in my last year of university, the first time around, I'm in university again now, I read a book, and it was talking about a Scandinavian author who was considered quite edgy and shocking in his own time. And it, as an example of why he was so shocking, it had this quotation from him in which he basically said, Shakespeare is overrated. He was just being blunt. And it described how the audience, like people stood up and walked out of the crowd where he was delivering this, because this was so shocking to say Shakespeare's overrated. But in reading it, I had to admit to myself, I felt shocked too. I don't think, like, I'm not aware that I glorify Shakespeare, but, I had a kind of startled reaction to that. So, yeah, in terms of the weight we ascribe to things in our culture, what they mean to us individually and collectively, yeah, I think Shakespeare's a really useful example in many ways. Many, many people quote Shakespeare at their weddings. At their wedding, they have someone read, a sonnet from Shakespeare, a quote from one of the plays, and many people read Shakespeare at their funerals. From my perspective, Shakespeare is more of a real religion than veganism. And you can ask whether or not Shakespeare is a more successful religion than Theravāda Buddhism. Maybe in the 22nd century, it will be. Because Buddhism's falling apart, my dude.
You've answered my next question, which I was talking about. I'll read it anyway, just because it's kind of relevant. I said, if I was to describe Judaism, I'd say it's a religion of the intellect, the spirit, and the community. The intellect as in the Talmud studies, men going to yeshiva and poring over the Torah, the spiritual in terms of the daily prayers and the. I know this is a very marginalized part of Judaism, unlike Christianity and Islam. Judaism, I don't think it's that concerned with spiritual matters, and there's the whole community aspect, micromanaging every element of daily life. I was wondering, taking these three kind of these three tenets, how would you rate them as far as in terms of importance in Theravāda Buddhism?
I didn't see that coming. Hey man, good question, but I think we should go on to the next question. You don't really want to hear the answer to that, do you?
Next question: do you like cricket or baseball? Let's have a look. What? So I see. Again, you've answered this question again. Buddhism and Pali studies. What I've written, was it a mistake to mix the academic studies with the spiritual engagement? But you've already said it wasn't a spiritual engagement.
Right, yeah. Well, what I'll add to that, though, because you've just asked, is it a mistake? I am really into recognizing my own mistakes and recognizing historical mistakes, and that comes out on my YouTube channel and in my writing. If anyone reads my writing, I talk about that a lot. And it was a mistake for me to become a scholar of Buddhism at all, and I regret it, and I wish I never had. And I'm open about that, and I'm honest about that with people, including when I talk to people who are professors of Buddhism. Or when I talk to Buddhist monks, which is now pretty rare, but I used to spend more time with Buddhist monks. So no, I do regret that. It was a mistake, period. And I mentioned this now. This is relevant to veganism and activism and all kinds of practical questions in life. Earlier I said 10,000 people can't change this channel, but one person can, 5 people can. In the same way, and this even relates to Judaism, the problem with Theravāda Buddhism is that I didn't meet 5 good people. I didn't meet 1 good person. And people who know me, I knew everyone in the field. Like, I knew going back to the old generation, people over 60 years of age, the new generation. I don't think any of them will watch this video or get insulted by this. But, go ahead and be insulted. Because, it really is my judgment on you all. I didn't know 1 person I could run a pancake stand with, which, as we've both reflected, actually is in some ways a very high level of trust and judgment of competence. But for my generation, it just so happened that, and my experience was in Asia, in Europe, in North America. I really knew those people, that they turned out to all be bad people by my standards, but I'm entitled to impose my own standards. So that is the fundamental reason why it's a regret and why it was a failure. And with veganism also, so you've just said you're only now starting to get involved with the London scene. You also have to ask yourself, at what point do you stop taking applicants? At what point is the door no longer open? Because I expect you, like, this is not a hypothetical you yourself, as an example. Let's say for the next 2 years, you really start showing up at events and meeting people and trying to find people you can collaborate with organize politically, whatever your ambitions are, or even, as I say, even to make silly videos like Kenya, like whatever, whether it's an artistic aspiration or political, you're trying to make something happen. And let's say for just 2 years, you're going around with your business card, you're trying to make those connections, trying to get something going. And for 2 years, the only people you meet are either idiots or drug addicts, or they're members of religious cults you don't get along with, or they're literally neo-Nazis. Like vegan. This is not hypothetical. You may meet vegans who can't get along with you. To say they can't get along with you for political reasons is an understatement. They may be literally neo-Nazis. And that's your experience for 2 years. At some point, the door is closed, whether you think it is or not. That door may close in your heart. You may not be aware of it, but you say, I'm not looking anymore. Obviously, for me, my process of declaring it over with Buddhism was very public and was really a line in the sand. And there were people in that field who really looked up to me, who really admired me. And, for them, obviously, that's going to have some impact. And I've heard about that. I just mentioned, like, a much larger number of people care about my stuff on veganism and animal rights or whatever, or political activism and that. But I know I have really had detailed messages from people by email, and a few times talking to people face to face, where my work on Buddhism changed their lives, not in a trivial way, in a really big long-term way. So even though I think that's a very small part of my YouTube channel going forward, or my online presence going forward, I'm not planning to go back to Buddhism. I do know that influence I had on people was profound and long-term. And even though maybe the number of people whose lives I touched is smaller, big impact. You can talk about yourself here. I mean, I just put that to you. It's not a question, but it's a bit of a challenge. It is something to think about. It
made me think. I mean, so I mentioned before I was involved with Falun Gong,
right?
Which is a kind of Buddhist Taoist.
It's a new religion. Yeah.
And I was very involved. It was funny enough, a religion partly about activism.
Yeah.
The leader of the group, Li Hongzhi, he lived in the US as a political exile, and he would release articles on a say monthly basis, saying, go to your local Chinese embassy, protest. Do leaflet drops. So 2 or 3 times a week, me and my little group would go around South Wales, putting leaflets through people's doors about the human rights issues.
Yep.
And we'd go up to London and sit outside the Chinese embassy. We used to do little meditations.
Yep.
But I was a lot more into the spiritual aspect than you were with Buddhism.
Right. And at some point it ended for you. At some point the door closed, huh?
It did. And
yeah.
I affected, there were people that joined that group because of me, because of leaflet drops, funnily enough. It kind of presented itself as a yogic relaxation. Come to the park on a Sunday morning, do some mind and body exercises, read the book, start on page 1, read to page 300. Page 1 talks about mind and body. Maybe you get to page 50. Can't develop the body without the mind. Get to page 200. Aliens control the internet. And further on, I mean, it's a very interesting. It's very interesting the way it works.
Yeah.
What broke it for me was moving away from the group. I moved from Cardiff to Birmingham, about 200 miles. For a job, and within a few days, the witchcraft just started to fizzle.
Yeah.
And it took me a few months before I could just say, this is bollocks. I don't want anything to do with this.
Yeah.
I went into a kind of halfway zone.
Yeah.
And I was getting a lot of texts from people saying, come back. You have demons trying to influence you. This is a test. You need to be strong.
And if I can ask, was that before or after you got married? Were you single then, or were you with your wife?
Yeah, I was single.
That's different.
Very single, actually. It's very hard to meet somebody in Falun Gong.
That's a bad cult, man. You don't even get laid. I mean,
it's a very bad. I think
any self-respecting cult would at least get you laid. Yeah. I told you yesterday. I was at the Jewish Community Center here. It's about 90% about getting laid. Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are these organizations like Chabad.
Yeah.
All they want to do really is get young Jews together, get them married, get them members of a synagogue. It was a very bad organization for that. I think partly because it banned smoking and drinking. Yeah. Which, as a young 20-something, that wiped out instantly a lot of my social connections.
Right. In England, that's a huge problem. Yeah. As you may know, I drink zero alcohol, etc. So, yeah, I'm really aware of that in England, how that cuts you off from mainstream culture.
Yeah, and so instant. And secondly, it consumes your entire life. So all I ever talked about was Falun Gong and exercise. So people found me understandably a bit boring.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I appreciate you talking about that. I think that's, you're being really real and sharing with people something that's worth thinking about. I'll come back to Falun Gong in 1 second. There was a small political movement in New York City, really at the heart of things in Manhattan, that was called The Rent is Too Damn High. I remember but because it was in New York, it got in the newspapers and they ran for public office. So, they were a real political movement. And as you can guess from their name, The Rent is Too Damn High. It was fundamentally about poor people and their struggles in the city and social services. And, in many ways, it was an important message. And there's a guy called Ed Lover, who's a kind of radio personality, a hip-hop personality. And I remember his response to it was, he just said to the guy leading it, he said, "Look, man, it's a beautiful message, but you aren't the guy to bring it. Like this is hopeless, not because of the message, not because of the objectives of the political movement, but because of the people," which comes down to 2 or 3 people, maybe, the people at the top of a small organization. It's mostly one guy who's giving the press conferences who really founded the movement, which is typical. Same with Direct Action Everywhere. Same with the Thai Fruit Festival and Freely Enduring. Right? It comes down to just a couple of people. And he just said, you are the wrong person to do this. And Falun Gong, I will officially state for the record that I am anti-Falun Gong, in case the Chinese government is watching this. They publish newspapers and books and what have you that criticize the Communist government of China. Mm-hmm. And whenever you read that, again, there's lessons for veganism, there's lessons for democracy, there's everything else. You got to say, you're the wrong dude to do this. And they slip so easily from, as you say, like sense into nonsense, from something reasonable to space aliens. And it discredits the whole thing. And they also, I note, they don't glorify democracy. They glorify the bad old days of feudalism, of and family values and having your grandfather control your life and family hierarchy and so on. It's just like, my dude, there's somebody could really criticize 21st century Chinese culture. Somebody should complain that the rent is too high in New York, but you aren't the dude to do it. And that's, it's a tragedy of a subtle kind.
Yeah, it's this thing about moving away. I was thinking about Simply Vegan. I was thinking, what is the reason he got seduced by this this Nazi ideology? And I think I came to the conclusion that he was disenfranchised. He felt disenfranchised as a young college white male. Perhaps maybe he wasn't having much luck with girls, and he bought into one or two. Perhaps he had, say, conservative views on immigration, and he bought into one or two aspects, and then the rest, maybe his official reason was because he read Plato's Republic and Aristotle and The Art of War, and then it started to make sense.
Right.
I think in reality he watched a bunch of YouTube videos like Jew World Order, and he was very tempted by that. I can't remember how this.
of all the aspects you just mentioned, because it's come up under other headings, I would actually to speak to the sexual aspect that you mentioned in passing there. A relatively long time ago, I had a video on direct action everywhere. Now, I've also had videos talking about Joe Best and Thailand and those sex scandals. I think some people might misunderstand what my view is on sexuality and in politics, or sexuality in general, or sexuality in vegan activism, or sexuality in cults, or these questions of how it interacts with political organization. But, one of my criticisms of direct action everywhere is, why are they hypersensitive to? Why are they trying to control people's sex lives? And why are they actively denying? They have a council of people in a little mini bureaucracy issuing press releases and statements and kicking people out for basically getting laid or trying to get laid within their movement, and denouncing people for daring to. And I said, why can't you be as cool as an Orthodox Jewish synagogue about the fact that people come to synagogue to find a husband or wife? Orthodox Judaism is not that sexually permissive. It's really not. But seriously, even Orthodox Jewish synagogues, a lot of them are very understanding about homosexuals seeking partners. I've known examples of that. Obviously, I'm not saying homophobia isn't an issue, but I just say even with that, it's the reality of life. And if you want to be a political person, if you want to be an artist, you want to lead a meaningful life, you want to be a poet, whatever it is you aspire to do, sexuality is part of it. Finding a girlfriend or a boyfriend is part of it. And, I wouldn't denounce someone for, I'm not saying the only reason you came to the vegan protest is to meet women. But of course it's part of it, and again, if I can expect a rabbi, it's normal. People openly say to the rabbi, oh, look, I used to go to this other synagogue, but there's really nobody there for me. Some friends of mine told me I could meet some people my own age here. So anyway, I just say I do think sexuality has a dynamic role in these things.
Even I get emails from people in the synagogue saying, "Can you fix up my sister?"
Yeah, right, or just
it's a normal thing.
Or just can you recommend a synagogue or group I can join us? Yeah. So that's also, but again, I am saying this. Some vegans, you should be insulted. If you're a sex negative vegan or something, veganism is a diet. It is a lifestyle. But I don't want it to only be a diet or a lifestyle. And if it's going to encompass your whole life in this way, we've got to have some mature, down-to-earth, and tolerant. I've talked a lot about tolerance on the channel lately. Tolerant attitudes towards sexuality. And the truth is, I don't like a guy like Joe Best. And when I was living in Thailand and Laos, I knew a lot of guys like Joe Best. But I tolerate him. When you tolerate someone, it doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you would live the same way yourself. It doesn't mean if I was in his situation, I would do it. It doesn't mean any of that. I don't accept it, but I tolerate it. And as you pointed out, coming back to the very first thing, this is a movement where, people can't tolerate Kenya. People can't tolerate passion and fruit. You're making pariahs, you're making enemies out of people over what? Over the fact that they eat hummus? Seriously, over beans? And, hey, sex is inevitable. Getting people pregnant is inevitable. Beans are inevitable. Hummus also is part of life. And, these are warning signs about the kind of ultra fragility of what even, could be a movement. So, yeah. Yeah,
and beans... And also talking about other people making comments about people behind their backs. If watching Big Brother has taught me anything, that's something people do. And I think if Henya made a comment in a YouTube comment section saying, Rotifor is not that great, I think it's not the end of the world. I think part of the problem is freely enduring rider becomes so defensive. About their movements, and they've pushed themselves into this situation where it's all or nothing situation.
Right, but I got to tell you, for me, this is 2016. I feel like you're talking about the past. I think that's over. I think that's run its course. And I don't know, 5 years from now, what the hell will the significance have been of the Thai Fruit Festival in the past tense? I'm sorry, I just don't see it as all that meaningful. I don't see any future in it. And again, people could get insulted, and they can watch my other videos and see why I think that way and feel that way. But like by contrast, there's a girl named Zaria. She's in London somewhere, so you may meet her eventually. She has some really simple videos where she's just standing in front of a slaughterhouse and talking to people. When I see that, I think that could be the start of something. It's only the start. It's only the very first little step, but that could lead to something 5 years from now, even if it's just those 10 people at that protest saying, hey, what are we all doing in the next 5 years? Let's make something happen. So it's not that I have zero optimism, but about the permanent vacation side of things, et cetera, about that, yeah. To me, we're talking about something that's already over. Look, you want to wrap it up there? I mean, we're coming up on 2 hours. Okay. It's been great talking to you, but
I did have a wrap-up question.
All right, great. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, wrap-up question. Young person comes up to you, sends you an email. I'm thinking about starting a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I really want to start a vegan YouTube channel. Can you give me a bit of advice?
So people do ask me for advice, including people who I consider successful, like Vegan Cheetah. And the main thing I tell them is, look, if what you're interested in is fame or views or subscribers, I'm not the person to talk to, because that's not what I'm about. That's not been my objective. That's not been what motivates me. What I'm doing, look, I used to have to say this on my blog to people all the time. All I'm trying to do is make friends. And YouTube is a very strange way to make friends. But the good thing about YouTube is, even if you make 100 enemies, maybe you're going to make one friend out of it. So look, I mean, maybe it's terrible advice, but for some reason you've specified a younger person. Some people ask me for advice are in their 50s. Some people are older than me. But I mean, that's kind of the realest thing I can say is, if you keep it real, if you talk about your real life, who you really are, what's really up with you, then a small number of people are going to respond to that and really want to be your friends and will respond to what's real about you. If you're phony, if you're evasive, if you're fake, if you're artificial, if you wear a mask, literally or figuratively, then you're not going to make those real connections. And look, I mean, I'm looking at going back to Asia right now. Obviously, I could present this image of beaches in Thailand. I could pose with a different beautiful woman in every video. Frankly, I could pull that off here in Victoria. But it would be even easier traveling in Asia if I wanted to give an illusion of affluence or what have you. Some people would hate me for that. Some people love me. Who coming out of that is going to be my friend? I have these books on camera. The point is not to project an illusion about this is my real life. When this video ends, this is what I'm really doing. This is what I'm really going back to. I have my real weights on camera too now, which is just the way it worked out in terms of my apartment layout. But I know to a lot of people it'll sound hackneyed or trite, but this is why I talk about keeping it real. And I think of keeping it real as the alpha and the omega of this whole thing. The audience is the art form. And, I think the little bit of value you can get out of YouTube, it totally depends on keeping it real. And unless you're going to get into the kind of artifice of doing sketch comedy or musical performance, you're making a work of art, that's different. But in terms of what we do, like you and I and most of the other talking heads on YouTube, then honesty is the only currency we've got. The only special effect on my channel is my real life experience, my real emotions, my real feelings that I'm a real person. So
honesty is the only currency we've got.
That's it, my dude. Great meeting you. This is actually the first time we've ever talked, in case people think we know each other, or we've done a whole bunch of conversations in the past by Skype. First time we've ever talked. We never talked by telephone or anything else before. And lovely to meet you, man.
Yeah, great to meet you too.